All right, let's go there.
It's
The Independent says, Donald Trump's Civil War bombast is bad enough. Democrats shouldn't help make it worse. Oh man. From Noah Berlatsky says, mocking someone for not being as tough as their rhetoric is not helpful if you want a public discourse that doesn't reward aggression. So this is just one of the many articles that are saying Donald Trump Civil War bombast or Donald Trump calls for civil war, blah, blah, blah. I love how they frame it. They're shocked and angered that Donald Trump would discuss such a thing. From May 11th, 2022, the Second American Civil War is already happening, from Robert Reich. Okay. The conversation around civil war is not just something Trump brought up. Apparently what happened is that on Truth Social, someone referenced Nayib Bukele, I think is his name, the president of El Salvador. He tweeted, a great nation like the U.S., can't be brought down from the outside. It has to be from the inside. Someone then quoted that and said civil war. Trump then retruthed it, which is their version of retweeting, which is terrible branding, by the way. But OK, let's live with it. And now they're saying Trump called for civil war. Trump, is this his first mention of civil war? Because this conversation has been happening for 4 years, and it started with mainstream corporate press.
Well, it's not his first mention of the Civil War. At least it might be, it might not be. But it is the first time the media has ever twisted his words and made it sound like he said something completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's first, we've never seen the media like grasp at straws to make it seem as if he's saying something completely different than they could reasonably say based on his statement.
So is civil war possible? Do you think it's possible?
I think it's happening.
It's always possible. Probable? I don't know. I think I tend towards Majid Nawaz making a statement about World War III, that it would be a bunch of civil wars as well as a global war, corporate war, neighbors on neighbors, information, all of it.
Well, let me tell you why I think it's happening and it's inevitable. You need to understand what it means in the context of fourth and fifth generational warfare we often bring up. It may not get to the point where people are fighting in the streets. It may just be what we're experiencing: information warfare, lawfare, media manipulation. In this modern era, do we need nuclear weapons when you have the power of propaganda?
Well, when I say civil war, I mean violence. I mean,
it's already happening.
To some extent. I mean, organized violence, and not just Antifa rioters smashing up buildings and beating people up, not just psychopaths randomly shooting at people. I mean, organized violence.
A National Guard, a governmental body.
Yes, and I vacillate on this, right? Sometimes when I grew up, it seemed pretty inevitable, right? And then in the 90s, it seemed pretty inevitable that the country was going to break apart. There was so much hatred in the air, so much violence. That was pretty much stamped out by the response to 9/11. And all of that sort of foment was pushed down by the fear of the NSA or DHS picking you off, and it just went cold. Now it's starting to get hot again. And I don't really see who would be the combatants in a clear way, right? You could say, it's going to be conservatives and liberals. It's going to be the urban versus the rural. What would that Civil War map actually look like? I did get an insight on that, though, when I think it was NBC published a map of which states would pull back abortion rights and which ones wouldn't. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's a clear map of what the battle lines would look like in the Civil War, but I think that's a pretty good indication because you've got a sacred value there, and I think that's what's pretty much behind most of this conflict is sacred values.
I think it's going to be fairly north and south. I mean, for the most part, we're seeing abortion laws like it's northern and western states that are pro-abortion to an extreme degree. Colorado, for instance, no restrictions, and it's many of the southern states that are trying to implement restrictions on it. So you may actually end up seeing this. I'll reference the meme where it says the United States of Canada and what was the other one? The South was called like the Christian States of America, and then the North was the United States of Canada, and it was like California, but then up and around like Nevada, and then the Midwest. What people need to understand about the first Civil War, Texas, my understanding, joined just because of geography. Texas was like, well, we're basically locked in next to the Confederacy. And if we don't join them, what happens? Who do we trade with? How does this work if we're a U.S. state or whatever? So then basically like by virtue of geography, we're joining this new union or whatever. I think the same thing would happen. You will see more conservative states that don't want to align with Illinois, New York, and California, but be like, what choice do we have? North Dakota and South Dakota will probably be roped up whether they want to or not. Their populations are so small, they may not have a choice. That could split the country. Honestly, I don't really know all too well exactly how to predict what would happen. Civil wars like the U.S. Civil War are rare. In fact, I'm not sure there have been other civil wars exactly like it where multiple jurisdictions split, between North and South. The Spanish Civil War, for instance, was pockets of urban and rural areas. Yeah. So we may actually just see that. And you will see, New York's got a massive urban police force, tens of thousands of people. But I think what people, what you need to understand right now about what's going on is geographic hyperpolarization is happening and will be exacerbated by the Supreme Court's ruling on Roe v. Wade and Casey. You're going to get, as you already are, conservatives in liberal areas fleeing, red states becoming redder, blue states becoming bluer, and then eventually we just completely disagree on everything, refuse to cooperate. And then what happens when Nevada puts up a border between California or something because they're like, you allow illegal immigrants, we don't, so we're building a border between states. These are the kind of things that precipitate major conflict. Or how about monkeypox? It spreads, and then all of a sudden one state says we're enacting border checkpoints between states so we can keep out certain illnesses, like we saw with COVID, actually, with Connecticut and New York.
You guys are big on Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard you talk about it. And let's just take his theory for granted, right? That human societies evolved so that they diversify naturally towards a conservative leaning and a liberal leaning. The conservatives obviously are holding down the traditions. Liberals are pushing society forward, and it's through that symbiosis that society goes forward, right?
Forward isn't the right word.
When I say forward, I mean in a more adaptive direction, right? So according to Haidt's theory, what you're talking about is humanity essentially as certain pockets of superorganisms in which having that variety, having the variety of foundations to draw from in any given problem, to face any given dilemma, you have a much greater chance of solving it because of this diversity of perspective, right? If we take that for granted, what's happening now with this big sort in the U.S. and what's been happening really for decades, but in the last 10 years, it's been extreme. In his theory, you're basically peeling the human organism apart. You're creating something that's profoundly new, that's never really existed before. We're in completely uncharted territory if that's the case. Now, most of my conservative friends listen to that and it's like, oh, well, that's just a way to legitimize liberal points of view and push them on to me. Liberals love it because it's all airy-fairy and we can all be together. But I honestly, I think that the COVID pandemic showed a real flaw in his theory because him and Jesse Graham, by the way, Jesse Graham deserves a huge amount of credit, but the idea that liberals skew primarily towards care and fairness and conservatives towards authority, in-group preference, and purity and sanctity, I think on the surface that makes sense. But when you look at what happened during COVID, you get a really good example of how flawed that is because liberals really did circle the wagons. And their sense of what is pure and what is tainted or what is polluting really kicked on. So whatever real distinctions there are to be made there long term, I think that did show a real flaw. And Haidt actually admitted that.
So what I see happening is you have this left wing and right wing. And as you mentioned, the right, the conservatives are holding back the left from going too crazy, but the left does bring about some changes. What happened is there was a weird budding phenomenon where the left started to have a growth of some sort that was ignored. And then eventually the growth just got big and flopped off and now is completely separate from the U.S. body. So, in this room, we've had actual liberals and conservatives talk and disagree on a bunch of core issues, as you describe it. But the modern left in this country is separate. The traditional left, as you describe it, as pulling us forward, is considered right-wing now because that weird budding phenomenon is slopped off and now is no longer connected to the existing infrastructure. That is the rise of the multicultural democracy within the United States versus the constitutional republic. It's being fed, it's being given sugar, and it's growing. And eventually it will either burst and break or it will consume the constitutional republic side of things. I think it'll probably burst because these people have no logic behind what they do. It's wild tribal nonsense. And they won't be able to adapt properly. They're not going to be able to survive. It really is. If they are the most extreme element of change and no tradition involves things like growing food. They don't know how to do this. If you look at that meeting with the DSA where they're like, "Hi, my name is John, he, him. I just want to say that, please stop using gendered pronouns for the group." You saw that thing that went viral?
No.
The DSA meeting, everyone's freaking out. They can't stop fighting because they're like, someone says, "Guys, please stop clapping. You're triggering my anxiety." And then a trans person goes, "Stop using gendered language." And they're all yelling at each other. And it was crazy. That's never going to function as a system of governance. Those people will not be able to grow food for themselves.
Don't you think they're puppets, though? I mean, do you really think that people...
That's not relevant. I mean, if you have 8 million people in this country who believe that, they're not going to survive a long fall.
Sure. No, but they're being held up. Clearly, to me, I think they're just weaponized malcontents, right? They're not... The entire, especially with the trans movement, I mean, this is not something that was grassroots from them, that they pushed their way into the public square. The left used them as a weapon against the right. And it shows, I think, in many ways, how devolved we are as a culture that they got as much traction as they did. Something as ridiculous as pronouns and whether or not one is being misgendered as being some kind of key issue for the nation. I think that they use these people to hammer on us.
We're not talking about right now. We're talking about a collapse, a conflict, civil war. They can't exist.
Sure. No, definitely. If it collapses, every transgender person on Earth will immediately start to detransition and things will get real ugly.
Not by choice. No. You're not going to have access to elective surgeries or medication. But it's not even about trans. It's about the entirety of the left moral framework has no merit. The left in this country doesn't understand concepts of merit or logic. Now, I'm not saying literally every single one of them, but if you look at their thought leaders, we had a tweet that went viral from Hassan, who is the most prominent left-wing streamer. And he said something about capitalism, that there's only 4 companies that produce baby formula. And that was a non sequitur. That idea makes no sense. It's not capitalism's fault. There's only 4 baby formula companies. It is not 4 baby formula companies' fault that there's no baby formula. And there's not no baby formula because there's only 4 companies. It's a nonsense statement. If that's going to be the prominence of thought, they're not going to actually solve the problem of baby formula. So if everything did go belly up into civil war or whatever, most farmers, probably conservative. I don't know, I could be wrong about that, but
No, absolutely.
Right. Most conservatives live in rural areas, meaning they likely have, on a scale of 1 to 100, the 100 being you are a prepper outdoorsman who can build a hut from trees in a day, and 1 being you are absolute city folk. If you're a conservative, you're leaning towards outdoorsmanship. So just living out here in West Virginia, I know what I can eat outside a little bit. I'm not going to pretend to be any kind of prepper outdoorsman at all. But I know when the wineberry season is. I know when the pawpaw season. I talk about it all the time. Hey, I know where to get some food. I know where the turkeys are. I know what the animals are around here. I know where the bears are. I know where the deer are. You live in a city. Let's say the store closes. What do you eat? Where do you get food? You have no idea. Even if you leave the city, you're going to be like, now I'm in a random rural place. What do I do? Well, unfortunately for you, you're going to have to go out probably 100 miles before you get into, and even if you go 100 miles, you're in owned territory. So if you live in the middle of nowhere, if you live outside of the suburbs, you're more likely to be conservative. You're more likely to know what to eat, where to get water. You live in a city, you got none of that. So good luck.
Yeah, having lived in Boston, Portland, and reared in Tennessee, and now living in Montana, I can tell you right now who's going to win that conflict. Right, I can tell you right now who's going to last if things go belly up.
Do we need BuzzFeed if the economy crumbles?
I don't think we need them now, but definitely not then.
Top 10 annoying things that happen when you farm. We're like, let me look at this.
The joke I made to we have like a plot of land far away. I won't say too much, but there's recreational communities that double as like in the event of an emergency come out, and I always tell them like, don't worry guys. When it hits the fan and everything goes crumbling, if you need someone to complain about stuff, I'll be there. That's the job I can do, right? No, as soon as you show up, they're going to be like, start cutting wood. And you're going to be like, yes, sir. That's it. Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.